Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of our COVID-19 Power Lunch, our twice weekly video series that brings our experts straight to you, virtually, of course. As a quick reminder, our videos will air every Tuesday and Friday at noon, and to help you further, we'll have our professionals available live to answer any questions that are coming through the comments section on that video of the day. Of course, if you have additional questions that are specific to your business or situation, please feel free to reach out to us or your CPA to get those questions answered via email or telephone. On the menu today is a DOL update and frequently asked questions about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which passed in mid-March. The FFCRA provided a wide range of assistance for American workers due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Not only does it provide paid time off for workers affected by the pandemic, it also gives employers the opportunity to receive tax credits to offset the cost of providing the paid leave. It passed in mid-March and went into effect on April 1st. James Moore did a webinar right before April 1st with what information we had and a lot of additional guidance still pending. So this webinar is meant to update you on additional clarifications we've gotten since then related to the FFCRA, as well as help with some questions we've received on unemployment. And with me today is our Human Resource Director, Julie Kniseley. Julie, is there anything you want to add related to FFCRA that I didn't cover?
Well, I would just remind everybody that it's in two parts. So the first part of the act is for paid sick leave. And as you mentioned, there's 6 reasons that people can use that paid sick leave. And then the second part of the act was expanded FMLA, which is just for childcare reasons, which would provide an additional period of time up to 10 weeks if you have childcare, school closings, that type of things. The other thing, just as a reminder, is the act is in effect for employers that have 500 or less employees. So if you are in that category, as you mentioned, Erin, it is mandatory. If you have 1 employee, 5 employees, if you're a nonprofit, most public sector employers, all private employers are subject to the act. And as I'm going to talk about in a little bit, we'll talk about how there is some exemptions for a certain part of this. But generally, if you are out you are sick with symptoms, you are under a stay-at-home order, you are taking care of a family member that is ill, or if you are ill but you're waiting for a diagnosis is another reason. And if you have childcare issues or school closings is reason number 5. And the 6th reason to have to provide this leave under the act is if there's, quote, other conditions that have been designated by the feds. There are none yet that have been disclosed, but it's still sitting there just in case they wanted to add something as kind of a catch-all.
Yeah, and we're not going to go into the details of the tax credits today and how they work, but all that information, again, is on our website or reach out to us. But what we're really going to go through, I think, is kind of the frequently asked questions as this has started to roll out and employers have become more aware of what happens, what they have to adhere to for employees, and it hasn't been as straight, I guess, out as people have thought. Hey, I need 2 weeks off because I have COVID-19. It doesn't seem to be that kind of straightforward. So one of the first questions that I know employers have asked a lot is, hey, if someone comes to me related to this and says I need to self-isolate, or I think I might have this or have been exposed to this, or I have children under the age of 18 who are home because of the schools closed, what do they need as an employer to keep as documentation to have this as qualified leave?
Yes, and luckily the Department of Labor has come out and clarified what some of those pieces are. And as the employer, you do want to make sure you get something in writing from the employee that contains these elements. It has the employee's name on it. It has the dates that they want to take the leave. It has the reason that they're taking the leave. One of those 6 COVID reasons, which one is it? Have them check the box and which one it is. And also, if they are under self-isolation, a healthcare provider has told them to stay home, they've been diagnosed, you need the name of the healthcare provider on the form and documentation to support that. If it's childcare reasons because of a school closing or something like that, or childcare is unavailable, then it's something from the childcare provider saying that they are closed. And it doesn't have to be some formal document from the school. For example, here in Alachua County, we know the schools are closed. It's on the website. You can do a screenshot of the website, and that is enough for documentation for that. But in order to get the tax credits at the back end, the Department of Labor is saying you need to get this stuff. The IRS is saying you need to get this stuff, and they have to affirmatively request the time. Too much detail for purposes of today, but there is a lot of guidance on the Department of Labor website that talks about if you have an employee who you suspect might have it, if you think somebody might be ill, and how you handle that. And I would recommend that you either go to our website to our frequently asked questions, or go to the Department of Labor website and look through their Q&A if you want to talk about those particular types of things, because it would take a half hour just to talk about that piece. So all of that documentation you need to keep. In addition, when somebody is taking leave under the Act, either the paid sick leave or the expanded FMLA, you want to make sure that you're recording that time in a separate bucket or somehow, so that you can track how many hours of that leave or how many days of leave each employee has taken when they took it. And again, you're going to need that for the tax credit if you choose to then take the tax credit on that.
Right. And most, I think, payroll companies or even like QuickBooks, they have developed codes, right, in their updates so that you can track this, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And many of the systems will automatically apply the tax credit, which actually could be a good question for you is, when depending on, if they're taking the tax credit, if the payroll company is taking it automatically, what happens if they've also applied for a loan?
Yes, the Paycheck Protection Program loan has been a big question, because one of the provisions in the PPP loan is that if you have qualified paid leave under this act, you can't use those as wages for the loan forgiveness. So one of the big things that people have said, well, what if I have this qualified leave before I get the funds? So my 8-week period hasn't started yet. Can I still take the credit? And the question is, we think so, but we're waiting for additional guidance, because we want to make sure that we don't stop that forgiveness from happening if you are using this as payroll, and it would be better off to do that, but also don't want to leave you in a lurch from the credit. So one of the things that we've looked at, and as of today we kind of know, is that you don't have to take the immediate credit as we thought, where you had to reduce your payroll tax deposit. You can take it later on your 941 or by filing a separate form the IRS has put out. So there does seem to be a little leeway in guidance. So again, what Julie said is making sure you've tracked it by employee so you can verify when you should have taken the credit versus the PPP. And then we'll have another series on the PPP probably next Tuesday to kind of give the updated guidance, and we'll try and cover that then. All right, so one of the other big questions that I know employers have had is under this act, people can ask for 2 weeks off, so 80 hours. So it doesn't have to be a straight 2 weeks, it's the first 80 hours. Or under the expanded FMLA Act, you can get up to 12 weeks for childcare. So the question has been, well, what if an employee says, I don't need to take I don't need to take 12 weeks, or I don't need to take 80 hours, but I want to spread it out, an intermittent use type thing. Is that allowed?
Yes, yes, and that's one of the items, again, with the Department of Labor clarified since we did our webinar, is that with the employer's permission, and again, the employer can choose whether to permit this or not, is that you can have intermittent leave. You can allow an employee to take intermittent leave, but it depends on whether they are teleworking or working at a job site, and it depends on the reason for the leave. So for example, if you have an employee who is sick with COVID or has symptoms and is under an isolation order and they're supposed to come to the work site, they can't take it intermittently because you don't want them there. You want them home being safe. If they were teleworking and they can work 6 out of 8 hours a day, so they could, with the employer's permission, use 6 hours of work, and you put that under their regular work code, and then use 2 hours of the paid sick leave or the expanded FMLA. But that's an arrangement that you make with the employee, and that you make a decision that you're going to permit that. It's a little bit more of an administrative headache, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit with one of the other questions we keep getting. But you can permit that. It seems like a reasonable thing to do, especially with employees who are teleworking but may have their children at home. There's also a lot of recommendations that as employers, and you probably are already doing this, is being as flexible as possible with the workday. So some positions you have to be plugged in 8 to 5 and telework from 8 to 5, but maybe they have a position or there are certain work requirements that they can handle after hours or on the weekends because they're also trying to take care of their kids. So I think in generally speaking, generally talking to employers, I'm hearing a lot about flexibility, and employers really wanted to do whatever they can to help their employees be successful under this situation while still getting the job done. So yes, you can use the intermittent leave, but you have to be careful on the reasons why they're taking it, and it has to be an agreement between the employer and the employee.
Yeah, it definitely seems on the intermittent use that would play a lot more into the childcare than it would be the self-isolation, can't say that word, and sickness. Because childcare, again, if you have both parents home or you have someone who can help, you may be able to telework 4 to 5 hours, but maybe able not fill the full 8-hour day. So that is really helpful that they're allowing that, because it seems kind of, it makes sense to
Yes.
all or none, right?
Right.
So then that kind of leads to the questions that, as we talked about before in our webinar, the limitation on how much you can pay people as far as under this qualified leave, and even on the expanded child care leave, it's up to 2/3 pay that you can get a credit for. So that led into a lot of questions. Well, what if an employee wants to use their other benefits, i.e. other leave that they have saved up, to either substitute or supplement, and I use those words because I know they changed them for us, to get their additional pay? How is that working?
It's a little bit of an administrative headache, but again, you mentioned earlier how sometimes the answers are even changing. So on Friday, the Department of Labor changed the answer to one of the questions and changed in the temporary rule as well on how you treat those first 2 weeks if someone has taken it for a child care reason, for example. If they have a child care reason and it's 2 weeks, up to 80 hours of the paid sick leave, it's only paid at 2/3. So originally the Department of Labor came out and said an employee can be allowed, if the employer wants to and it's voluntary, they can take their own personal time, their own paid time off or vacation time for those first 2 weeks. That way they can stay at 100% pay. Sounds easy. As of Friday, the department changed that to not say substitute, it's now supplement. So what does that mean? That means that that same employee, using you as an example, Erin, if you need to be home for 2 weeks with your kids because of schools being closed, those first 2 weeks now are 2/3 pay under the Paid Sick Leave Act. But you could choose to use 1/3 of your own time, 1/3 of PTO, 1/3 of vacation, in order to stay at 100% of wages. So from an employer standpoint, you'd be paying 2/3 under the Act, and then you're going to have to do a calculation to determine what that 1/3 is, what that value is in their PTO, if you want to permit them to still stay at 100% pay. Department's very clear that it's only to get up to 100% of wages. This is not a way for them to use that time simultaneous with the paid sick leave so they can get paid more than their regular wages. But it's a little bit of a calculation, and again, it's up to the employer to decide if they want to give employees that an option. The other thing that happened is on the expanded FMLA piece, which is that additional 10 weeks, the department has said that it's really up to the employer to decide whether they want employees to use their own personal time simultaneous with that expanded FMLA leave. Okay. Still waiting for additional clarification on that because it doesn't say substitute. It doesn't say substitute. It says coincident with and against it. So I don't know exactly how that's going to happen at this point. So I would imagine the department is probably going to clarify it again to say people will use their expanded FMLA for 2/3 and can use their personal time for the 1/3. But that's not what they're telling us right now. As we've said a million times, everything is changing on an hourly basis sometimes. So I think I'd like to see some additional guidance on that piece.
No, definitely. So, and one thing to reiterate that we talked about before is the expanded FMLA applies to everybody, right? Not if you're just under normal FMLA rules where it doesn't apply to you. This applies to everybody?
Correct. It applies to everybody in the under 500 employees category, yes. And again, we're going to talk about the exemptions.
Okay. So let's get to that next. So one of the questions has been is that, hey, I have less than 50 employees, so I'm exempt from this whole thing. True or not true?
Not that simple. It's not that simple. And people are making the assumption that if they're under 50, they're automatically exempt. The other piece that seems to confuse people is that The exemption is only for the child care piece.
Mm.
So if you have somebody who is sick with the virus and has to stay home or is quarantined, you have to provide that paid sick leave, that 2 weeks. There's no getting out of that piece. It's
Right.
only for child care reasons at this moment that the department says you can get an exemption. And the exemption is only happening is if you can show that it would have a significant impact on the financial or productivity of your business. And you're going to have to show that, you're going to have to attest. An officer of the company has to attest to the fact that it is a significant financial burden or operational burden that would jeopardize the viability of the business. And that's why you can't do it. More guidance coming, but that's how it is now. And the department says, don't send us documents, but you need some kind of attestation from an officer of the company that lays out why you can't do this. And again, it's only for the child care piece, not for the other COVID reasons.
And I think that's been one of a lot of the questions we've gotten on the COVID reasons, because although there's obviously a lot of cases out there, it's like in Alachua County, I think a couple days ago, it was 187 cases. So in a county of thousands of people, there's not a reason that a lot of people would be sick under this qualified sick leave. But we've gotten a lot of questions about people who have, they feel like they're more at risk to get it at their job, correct? And they may have low immune systems or other things, or they're just scared. So I know one of the questions is that an allowed reason?
Just being scared and wanting to stay home is not a good enough reason, which has been clarified by the DOL. However, if you have somebody and the reason that they're scared and they feel they need to follow the stay-at-home orders because they are over the age of 65, or they have a compromised immune system or a condition that has been laid out as one of those conditions that would qualify as a reason to be under the stay-at-home order, then that's something you as an employer, you really want to work with the employee. And if they do have something like that and they come to you and say that they need this paid sick leave because of X, they have a condition, get a note from the doctor or find out, to have them get something saying that they are subject to that. It's a little different when you're teleworking, because if you're scared and you can telework, well, that's fine. You can still work from home. If you were an essential business and you have employees that are still working and coming into the office, and one says, look, I'm 70 years old and I'm too scared to come in. Well, you want to work with them, because what you don't want is that employee coming into work and then getting sick.
Right.
So I think we just need to be reasonable and really have good communication with the employees. It can be a lot more complicated than this, and there's a lot of scenarios. So I would encourage anybody that has a particular case of employees who are just refusing to come in, reach out to us, and we can kind of deal with that on a case-by-case basis, because every situation seems to be just a little bit different.
Yeah, and we've gotten a lot of them. Like some of the ones that I've seen even just come through as questions to you and I from doing the webinar, I'm like, well, I would never have pictured this would be a question, right?
Yes.
And you have to deal with one of them. And the other big thing is that you have to look at past the FFCRA and look at the American Disabilities Act? Like how does that affect it? And one of the things that I think too is that we've heard from employees is they don't want to give all their information to their employer about their compromised immune system, or because before they didn't have to, and now it's a little bit weird. So it'll be interesting to see how we deal with the after effects of that from an HR perspective.
Oh yes, yeah, and we have to be really, really careful, because and they've come out with some OSHA guidance. They've come out with some EEOC has come out with some guidance, because we don't want to get too involved in people's health care and what their personal conditions are, and it's their right to keep that private. There are some caveats because of COVID in particular, but not necessarily because they have diabetes or something. So as I said, it can be, you really have to kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis, and keeping in mind what's best for the health and safety of your employee while still trying to get your jobs done. And sometimes that's not a very clear-cut answer.
No, it doesn't seem to be. I haven't seen a clear-cut answer yet. Any of these.
Right?
And I
Yeah.
do want to do a plug if you, because we do have on our website the poster. It's also on the DOL website that you are required to have posted, whether it's on your website or in your office or in your place of work. And I know that there's quite a few employers that have said, what poster?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't set out in a kit like all the other posters are every single year. But we do have a copy of that on our website, but you can also find it on the DOL website. But just don't want to get caught that you don't have that hanging somewhere. Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to kind of pivot to another question. Another lot of questions that we've gotten is related to unemployment. And I'm pretty sure Julie never thought she'd become an unemployment expert. She likes to help keep people employed, right?
Yeah.
So what is going on with unemployment in Florida? They passed the CARES Act a couple of weeks ago that supposedly is going to increase the amount of unemployment that people are getting. So what is going on with Florida and people applying for unemployment?
In a word, it's a mess, unfortunately. Florida is in the position of having to try to catch up under a very bad situation. So as you mentioned, the CARES Act provides additional benefits, unemployment benefits, that is going to be paid for by the feds. And that includes, and I'm sure everybody has probably read articles about this, that it's an additional $600 a week on top of what you get from state benefits up to July 31st. It expands the amount of weeks of benefits by another 13. So in Florida right now, it's $275 a week max to a total of 12 weeks. This expands it to 13 weeks by 13 weeks. And the other thing it does is it opens up unemployment up to people who normally would not be eligible, such as gig workers, your Uber drivers, self-employed, as well as independent contractors. So I was like, great, we are eligible for all of these benefits. Everybody hit the system, everybody hit the website, and the website keeps crashing. You can't get through on the phone. They are bringing in additional support people to try to help answer the phones. They've brought in additional servers to try to handle it. They've actually set up now a second website for applications, but it's a mess. And it's really a challenge right now. So while I'd love to say that we have a lot of answers on how Florida is handling the federal piece, we're waiting on Florida to actually apply the CARES Act to Florida. One of the unfortunate parts right now, and the way they designed it, the feds designed it, is everything goes through the state. So in order to get access to all those additional benefits coming from the feds, you have to go through the state system, which, with 500,000 plus claims, at least so far, have come in. We had more claims in the state of Florida in 1 week than they did in the entirety of 2019. So it's no wonder that the systems are overwhelmed. Our governor had a conference yesterday. He's doing like daily calls, and somebody actually even asked about the 600. And he made a comment that he thinks the 600 should be coming from the feds, not from the state. So it's kind of left everybody a little bit in limbo. If you are self-employed, if you're an independent contractor, if you go to try to apply right now, you will be told you're not eligible. If you pick up the phone and you manage to talk to somebody, you'll be told you are not eligible. So the unfortunate part is we're all having to be extremely patient and wait for Florida to kind of catch up and adapt their systems to be able to handle all of these additional people that are now eligible. Because right now, the application doesn't even, if you check a box saying you're self-employed, it's going to knock you out. So we're just kind of waiting. And with a couple of the other things it did, the CARES Act did, is it said that there's not a waiting week anymore. So that should also happen. One of the other outstanding questions is, will it be retroactive back to the date the claim was made, as opposed to when it's approved? Because of these problems. I mean, people have been waiting a month now, 4 or 5 weeks, and are still in pending status. So that's another big question, is will they let it go retroactive back to the date they applied? And unfortunately, we just don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard is no one has gotten paid under unemployment yet. Even if you just were furloughed or laid off from your job and you're not self-employed or a gig worker, the question has been, well, if I applied for unemployment, I should have it by now. I don't know anybody who's gotten unemployment yet.
No,
I applied 3, 4, 5 weeks ago. And so that retroactive thing is a big question. So that kind of leads me into a comment that I've heard a lot from employers is, am I better off to lay off or furlough my employees versus even try and take them under the Paycheck Protection Program, and let's say we're just still waiting for funds because they can get more money? And my answer has been yes, because I think, Julie, am I right that you said that if an employee is making $45,000 or less normally under a salary, this new unemployment of $875 a week with the Fed 600 Florida 275, they actually would make more, right, than they normally do.
Right.
So it sounds like a better deal, especially for the employers. Hey, I'll let my employees go and apply for unemployment and they'll get paid more. And my comment has been, but I don't know when they'll get paid. So if they get a paycheck and you get the money from the PPP, or you can keep them working in some sort of capacity, they may be better off to get a little bit of a paycheck than this other thing. And I know that's another question, and it's way too much time for this webinar, but there's a lot of other rules about furloughing people versus laying off people and who's eligible for unemployment. And I know Julie has been fielding that with her HR team a lot from different questions, and it's not an easy answer. I do know that.
No, unfortunately.
And no one's got money.
Patience, that's all we can do right now. And it's hard when you have employees that are sitting out there and have bills to pay. You know, asking them to be patient for what could be another few weeks. And on the self-employed and independent contractor piece, the latest I've seen is, it could be weeks before Florida's ready to handle that, you know. And gosh, we can only hope that we're kind of back to normal by June 1, but we don't know how long this is going to happen. So it's a challenge.
Oh, definitely so. And so for anybody who feels frustrated or doesn't understand the unemployment stuff, join the line. It's crazy. And I know that even Florida had handed out paper applications at some places because the websites were down. I don't know if those are getting processed any quicker. Again, it just seems to be a big cluster. And so they're trying to figure it all out.
Okay. One piece of good news, though, is I did get my stimulus check last night. So I think if everybody starts looking at their bank accounts, you know,
that's good news.
Which hopefully for those people that are waiting in line for the unemployment, at least if they're getting their stimulus checks, at least that's something coming in to help them out right now.
Yes, and I would encourage any employers who maybe their employees aren't as up on the news or are very tech savvy. That's the other piece, that a lot of different programs, including utility companies, insurance companies, mortgage companies, credit card companies, they're all giving really big grace and deferrals for up to 90 days for people. So hopefully if people understand that they may have to ask for it or apply for it, or some of them are even being automatic, is just make sure that they know that's available and that they can focus their money toward things that they need to live, which today is food, right, on that piece of it, and gas. But there's other things that they can kind of put off. It doesn't mean it will never be due. But obviously, if they have to get unemployment or are waiting for their job to come back at full time, that's a way to kind of help them or counsel them on how to manage their money. And I will say that I think one of the biggest things that I've seen is everything being virtual is so technology driven that for those who are not tech savvy, this has been a struggle for this piece of it. So if you know someone who's struggling with them, that is a real problem that we've seen, especially depending on who really likes their phones or computers, or normally they don't know how to access that, which I think is another problem that Florida had with the unemployment when they had to hand out paper applications, is people didn't understand the website or the app.
Right, you know? Right. Yeah, well, and then and it's not working. They actually have, I think, I can't remember who it was. A bank, I think, had where they were using their drive-throughs to hand out applications to people, so you could just go through the drive-through. I can't remember what bank that is, but they're out there, and yes, they do have a paper application, and I'm glad you brought that up. There's a paper application that you can snail mail in, and they're supposed to be also developing a way for you to take that paper application and email it or upload it somehow. That has not happened yet, but you know, I think they're trying. I think they're just so incredibly overwhelmed with what's happened that it's just, you know, and again, the CARES Act was just passed what, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago, but yes. Yes.
So patience is the thing we need the most right now, I think.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for all your information. I know we could have gone on for hours and hours, and want to again encourage anybody, if you haven't already asked a question in the comment section, to please do that, or to reach out to us, and we will do our best to answer you. I know one of the things that's really frustrating for us is that we continually say we're waiting for additional guidance to come out, or we have to have an answer, but they do keep putting it out. It just comes either hourly or daily, and sometimes changes things. So what is true today, a week from now, may have a little twist to it. So we just encourage you to follow back up with us or make sure that you're following the rules as they are currently interpreted, right? That's the best, it's the best we can do at this point.
Exactly.
So with that, we will see you in our next one, and thank you so much for tuning in, and we appreciate everyone's support during this time, and we hope that we're giving good information as it pertains to today, the HR stuff, Paycheck Protection Program, which will be coming up next Monday, and we'll continue to highlight different issues and up-to-date things throughout our series. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.